Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder to yet another tank review. And this time we'll have a look at a new French premium rank 4 medium tank, the Panther Dauphine. And already you will argue, oh, it is uninteresting and this has nothing to offer for me personally. And if you have the German and also the Soviet reward Panthers, as well as unlocked all the German Tech 2 ones, then surely this tank will not bring any big surprise to you. There is one thing that this tank has exclusively in common with the Soviet Panther, and that is that it allows you, more or less only in realistic mode, to have a look into an alternative matchmaker. So my experience with the German Panthers was that I very often fought in up tiers, and that was just exceptionally bad experience because there was so much heat FS flying around, stabilizers from the British with their APDS firing 20 pounders. It was just not fun. This tank, on the other hand, doesn't see all that many up tiers, at least in my experience, and that is definitely having a look at. Now obviously you'll have the overall rundown on the statistics as usual, a comparison to its main opponents on the battlefield, and also this is underlined with some gameplay, and I have one very nice match indeed on the rather end of the video. So I think that's enough rambling for the intro. Without further ado, let's get straight into it. As usual, I want to begin my review with a look at the armor. Let's begin at the lower glacis, only 50mm but angled at 55 degrees. Usually that's not enough, but behind that there is actually a transmission that absorbs, much like with the Tiger 2 series of tanks, a lot of the incoming damage. But this is a potential weak spot. And especially for 76mm guns, this is a chance to penetrate the hull of the tank, because the upper glacis with 80mm is much better protected, and at 56 degrees angles you're looking at an effective thickness of, depending on how exactly you shoot, up to 130mm. But because a lot of the shells lose the line of sight penetration with angling more than the actual effective thickness, this is able to absorb 76mm shell fire from the Americans in particular. 17 pounder with APDS obviously goes through like a hot knife through butter. Also a lot of the Russian 122mm etc., they also can punch clean through. But this is also one of the rare plates that absorbs the Soviet 85mm APHE shell from time to time. The side profile of the tank is huge, and behind the tracks there is only 41.5mm and 50mm respectively on the lower and upper plating. Don't angle this tank, it just simply doesn't work. Much like with a jumbo Sherman, this is very fragile. Then the rear of the tank, only 40mm, also huge target profile, and if you shoot there with APCR or AP, the shell easily goes through this armor, the engine, and then still shrapnels the crew to death. So don't get shot in the rear if you can avoid it. Then let's come to the turret, and yeah, the turret has here a turret face which is rather flat, at 110 cost homogeneous armor, so it's a bit weaker, and much like with the gun mantlet of 100mm, you are not really having the best protection. But the gun mantlet has the funny thing that it is rounded on the upper and lower end, which can bounce a lot of the shells. The problem is, the shells that ricochet off here, they go clean through the 17mm deck plating, and that is actually not really nice because it will kill your crew. This shot trapping is very effective, and there are some strong points like 130 and 300mm on the surrounding of the actual gun barrel. Then there's also a cost homogeneous armored 110mm thick cupola if the Panther tries to work a ridgeline. We'll see later on why this is not such a good idea. Then the side of the turret as well as the rear, 45mm, huge target, and also on the right hand side there are some add-on tracks, but that will not help you except maybe versus some SPAs, but don't really rely on it. So again, the deck armor with 17 and 15 millimeters for the hull and the turret respectively isn't really that effective. Surprisingly thin actually for a German tank. And with having said this, let's have a look at the interior. We can see here the transmission, as I said, at the front of the tank. And yeah, the next thing is that the engine together with the fuel tanks and the radiators is in the back of the tank. Then we have two people sitting at the front in the hull, the driver and the machine gunner, and then we have three people in the turret. And as you can see, right behind this 50mm plating, there is a lot of the ammunition. You have overall 82 rounds of ammunition. Even half of this is good enough for any given battle. And a lot of the shells are also standing upright, so that's not really all that great. If you shoot center mass from the side, this is more or less guaranteed a kill on a Panther. So yeah, let's have a look at some statistics, shall we? So now let's talk about the mobility of the Panther Dauphine, and I want to compare it today to the Panther A and the Panther D, the American T-25, the Italian M36B1, the Soviet T-3485, and obviously the British Centurion Mark I. Let's begin with the engine, and the engine puts out a nice 600 horsepower. However, the Panther D and the Panther A both have 50 and 100 horsepower more respectively. Both tanks therefore have as a penalty half a ton more, 54.3 in comparison to the Dauphine's 44.8. However, that doesn't really make up for the lost horsepower, and so the Panther Dauphine clocks in at 13.4 horsepower per ton ratio. The Panther D and Panther A have 1 and 2 horsepower per ton more, and even only the T-25 has less horsepower to ton ratio overall. But you can see all those tanks are pretty much close together. The top speed is limited to 46 km per hour, which is actually on the lower end. Again, only the Centurion Mark I and the M36B1 have a lower top speed. In fact, the Panther A and Panther D have 9 km per hour better top speed, and in combination with the higher horsepower to ton ratio, they reach overall a higher top speed on average. And in particular, when you're climbing hills, you feel a little bit the drawback, but it's not the end of the world. A lot of people that don't drive the Panthers all day long will not really notice the difference. A big difference to all the other tanks that all the Panthers have in common is the disastrous reverse speed. So you cannot really work ridgelines, you cannot really work corners. It robs you a lot of versatility, and neutral steering doesn't really make up for this, as the neutral steering, like with most tanks, is relatively slow. In fact, I would argue that the M36B1 and the T-3485 have better turning capabilities from the get-go. So now, finally, let's come to the business end of the tank. Let's talk about the gun. And obviously the Panther Dauphine, the Panther A and the Panther D share the same gun, the long-barreled 75mm Kampfwagenkanone KWK-42. You have a lot of shells. I would recommend you to get a lot of the ammunition out of the tank. Round about a third to half of the ammunition is more than sufficient for any given battle. The reload, on the other hand, with 7.4 seconds is quite nice, quite average. Only the Centurion Mark I is faster by roughly 20%, with 5.9 on the 76mm quick-firing 17-pounder. Then let's come to the turret rotational speed. With 20 degrees per second, the tank is actually, well, on the lower end of the scale in comparison to the other non-German tanks. But this is not to say that the turret rotation speed is bad. In fact, it is very nice, it is usable, and yeah, you're not snapshotting that nicely in the first place. Due to the large mass of the tank, it takes a while to stop and to come to a hold, but 20 degrees per second is nice, and it is better than the Centurion Mark I, but it is so much better than the disastrously bad Panther D 6 degrees per second turret traverse, which is more akin to a tank destroyer casemate gun traverse speed. So it is not the best in class. That goes to the 28 degrees per second of the M36B1 Italian tank destroyer with a turret, but it is nice. Then the gun depression, -8 degrees is okay. It's not as bad as the T-34-85's -5, but the real ridgeline workers are the T-25, M36B1, and obviously the Centurion Mark I, especially if you consider that you have in the Panthers a very bad traverse speed of only -3 to -4 kilometers per hour. The other tanks are therefore way better suited for doing that job. The 20 degrees of gun elevation is okay, as well as is the elevation speed. It is quite average for this battle rating, although certain tanks have a slight advantage here and there, but this is more than good enough for any given scenario. Let's now talk about the ammunition of the Panther Dauphine, and it has access to only 2 shell types. The first shell type is the Sprenggranate 240. This is your high explosive shell. The muzzle velocity goes down to 700 meters per second, which is not really all that amazing, as well as the 725 grams of TNT equivalent filler is also not gonna win any sort of KV2 high explosive meme contest. 11 millimeters of penetration is also not really nice, and it might help you versus some of the potato trucks, but the lack of heavy machine gun and the lack of penetration on your coaxial machine gun requires you to take at least 3 to 4 with you, and yeah, there is not much more to say about this. The second and last shell type is your Panzergranate 39-42. It is your armor-piercing APCBC round. It has an amazing muzzle velocity of 935 meters per second, which is best in class in this comparison, as well as the penetration, but by not that much, with 192 millimeter at 10 meters distance. At 1000 meters, you're still looking at 156 millimeters of penetration. The bursting charge is quite low, with under 30 grams. However, it is better to have some TNT filler rather than none, like the Centurion Mark I. And so the shrapneling is sufficient enough to kill all the crew. With these, if you enter dead center the crew compartment of an enemy tank, from the front or from the side. And also the buff to a fuse sensitivity, which is now 14 millimeters, allows you to now arm even versus Hellcats if you not outright hull break them when hitting the transmission or the engine part, because the kinetic force of the shell is so high. The problem with this tank is that it doesn't have any other shell type to back it up for up tiers or versus special enemies. For example, you have no APCR, which the Panther A has to increase the penetration way above 220, and also lets you hit enemy targets at long range. Your scope is good enough, but it's not really all that reliable at very long distances, although with the current map rotation you're not really fighting on maps all that often that allow you to shoot at long ranges, although that's the tank's strength. Then the tank also doesn't have any sort of APDS round, which the Centurion Mark I has, and it also doesn't have any sort of heat or heat FS round, which the M36B1 has. So especially in up tiers, especially versus enemy heavy tanks from the front, you really need to make the shots count, you really need to aim carefully, and so it is better to use your mobility and flank them, and therefore the shell is very nicely suited. So that has been the review, a verdict if it is worth it or not. Before I do this though, let's sum it up, and let's also talk about the things that are not so nice. First of all, the shot trap is really annoying. Then the reverse gear is really destroying a lot of the versatility that this tank has. You don't really have any sort of top mounted machine gun or even a heavy machine gun, so you're very vulnerable versus aircraft, which can harass you with rockets and bombs, because your deck armor is also so weak, and as I said, the reverse gear is pretty pathetic. So you cannot really work ridgelines effectively, you don't have a stabilizer, you're limited with your ammunition, although the ammunition that you have is good enough to do the job versus enemy tanks. And your mobility overall in a straight line is great, but your maneuverability lets things to be desired. Overall, this is your only Panther available outside of the German tech tree. So if you have no interest in the German tech tree, but you also don't have the Soviet rewards, then you have pretty much with this the only non-German Panther. I think that this tank is nice. It also lets you have a look at the matchmaker from a different perspective, because while I have a lot of up tiers versus very nasty opponents when I try to play my German Panthers, with this Panther the experience is much better. So if you love Panthers, if you love the look of it, and if you want to grind through the French tech tree, this is a very nice premium. Although, much like with some other premiums, it is only rank 4, so you are pretty much dead at rank 5 in your research. Rank 6 and rank 7 you have hefty penalties, and it is absolutely not worth playing through. The Silverline and RP modifiers are pretty nice, 1.78 for the RP and 1.4 times 2.0 for the RP for the Silverlines respectively, so you can make some nice results indeed. One final aspect that I actually think is pretty nice on this tank are the smoke grenades. You can launch them from your turret. You have 6 of them which you can launch individually. It is just said that again you only have 2 shell types, so you don't have a smoke shell to back this up. Anyways, you can reload them in the capture zone pretty quickly, and they allow you to get out of some unnice situations pretty efficiently. So that has been the tank review on the Panther Dauphine, a very nice French premium tank at rank 4. It is definitely worth it if you're a collector, if you're a Panther lover, but it is also limited in certain aspects. Overall, I like the tank, I like the look of it, I like how it plays, and how much variety it brings to it. Although not everybody likes that kind of variety when it comes to realistic battles, when it comes to simulator battles. Let me know in the comment section how you like this presentation, and as usual, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other on the waves, in the skies, and on the battlefields of War Thunder.